Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. Tobago Thursdays continues, and joining us is Abigail Berkeley, a nutritionist from the Community Nutrition Unit of the TRHA, to speak about salt awareness and the impact of salt on non-communicable diseases. Good morning, Abigail, and welcome.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show this morning. Thank you so much for taking some time out. Let's get straight into the conversation because, of course, salt is something that we all know about, but we know we need some sodium. It's time to clear up some of the issues. But before we get to that, why is salt consumption such an important issue to public health? And why do we need to be more aware of our intake?
So, excessive salt intake can lead to increased risk of hypertension, which in turn elevates one's risk for heart disease and strokes. And in Trinidad and Tobago, these NCDs are on the top leading causes of death annually in our country.
And the thing is also, I mean, in the Caribbean, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a love for highly seasoned food. So how does our cultural diet contribute to this? And what are some of the potential long-term risks, aside from what you would have just shared?
So, well, exactly. If we think about how we cook and what we eat, our diets are high in processed foods, which means that we get a high amount of sodium, coming into our diets. Now, before we dive into that, it is said or it's recommended that healthy adults consume 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. And that is equivalent to just about 1 teaspoon of salt for the day. Now, if we think about just how we cook and what we purchase, we easily see that we exceed that amount significantly. Now, when the diet is high in sodium, the body retains fluid. And this increase in fluid, in an attempt for the body to dilute the amount of sodium in the bloodstream, it therefore then increases the amount of blood volume and also the blood in our blood vessels. This gives the heart more work to do. And over time, so are consistently having these high sodium diets and the heart having to work very hard, over time, it leads to damage of our blood vessels. And this in turn leads to heart disease and strokes. And if we know of anyone who had a stroke, specifically, the quality of life is significantly diminished. So it therefore means that persons who have even hypertension, heart disease, and strokes, they are less likely to contribute to the productivity of the country. It means that there is a greater health burden, so we have greater health spending, and the quality of life, because these are our adults. So it therefore means the persons is at a significant economic downturn because these health conditions do increase the economic burden on an individual.
Thank you for connecting those dots for us this morning. So one of the things we know we need to do is reduce our salt intake. Very important. But a lot of people will think, that it's just a case of reducing how much salt you throw into your pot. But there are some hidden sources of sodium as well. Can you share those with us?
Definitely. So, we talk about the salt, table salt, and there are many different types of salt. So you just talk about the sea salt, the pink salt, Himalaya salt, the Celtic salts. So all these are salts, and while some of them may have more minerals in them, we still need to limit how much we consume. Now, just think about how we cook. So adding those tastemakers, sometimes those pack seasonings, tend to give us greater amounts of salt in our pots. Using canned foods, especially items that are stored in like brine solutions, that also gives us salts as well in the diet. We look at sausages, the salt fish, the pigtails, salt beef, and those are also gives us high amounts of salt in the diet as well. You look at things like even as much as your soft drinks, because some of these preservatives in normal foods, especially the processed items, are also forms of salt and therefore increases how much salt an individual consumes daily.
Now, Abigail, as we continue the conversation about salt awareness, specifically the reduction and how we need to be aware, what tips do you have, practical tips that we can implement in our daily lives in order to bring down the amount we intake?
So first, we want to look at trying our best to limit how much salt we add to foods. And as I said, basically any form of salt, we want to limit that amount. It's recommended that we just 1 teaspoon of salt will give us what we need or what the body needs to maintain those vital bodily functions. We want to avoid using processed meats. So instead of like the salt fish, the salt beef, we want to buy fresh and frozen meats. We avoid using things like peas and so in the tin, and we opt for the dried versions or the fresh versions of these peas. Like if we have things like vegetables, so sometimes we want some vegetables to add to our food, we can purchase the fresh or frozen forms. And that gives us less sodium. We look at what we use to enhance the flavors of our food. Now, we want to use more fresh herbs and spices. So things like your garlic, ginger, shadow benny, chive, French thyme, even things like your bay leaf to heighten the flavor of our foods instead of adding the salts and of course these packed seasonings to our pots.
Something that is very important, because the last thing we want to do is compromise flavor. Let's speak about nutrition labels, particularly. You would have mentioned those which items that are preserved in brine, for example. When you read a nutrition label, will you see the sodium amount from the brine accounted for? And what are there any hidden things that we need to look out for on the label that are going to guide us accordingly?
So when we look at our food labels, and we are speaking specifically of sodium, we will look for sodium on the label. Now, we'll also see the daily percent value. And just as a general rule, 5% or less of any item. So if the sodium, the daily percent value is 5% or less, we know that that item is a low sodium product. And if the percentage is getting up more to 20%, then that is a high sodium product, and we therefore need to look for an alternative. Also, when we read our labels, and especially the ingredients list, anything listed with the ending IUM is normally known as a sodium or a form of salt.
You see, this is why we need to have these conversations so we can really understand what we are putting into our bodies. Now, let's go to the conversation of age groups being affected, because some of the things you would have mentioned, for example, hypertension, we've seen over the years, younger people are being affected. In your work, do you see a certain age group being, suffering particularly, or is it across the board?
So times have really changed. Long time we used to see these conditions more in our elderly population, but now we have very young persons within the community having high blood pressure levels. Sometimes even at our secondary school levels, we have persons with high blood pressure level. So this therefore means that when persons start off so young having these high blood pressure levels, the complications of these diseases, they often get them at an earlier age. So you have things like increased kidney disease and these things in these younger population. So young persons are not exempted from this. And even as we have children or 5-year-olds coming up, we need to start to implement these low sodium and low salt choices so that as they come up and develop into mature young adults, that we do not have these problems occurring.
Abigail, as we just go back to prevention for a moment, are there any specific foods or nutrients that can combat or counteract the effects of excessive salt?
So, for hypertension, we normally use what we call the DASH diet. And this diet will look at one, having higher potassium intakes, looking at increasing your fruits and vegetables. So as a first line, we encourage persons to consume more fruits and vegetables, to have things like their calcium-rich foods. You're using more of your trace minerals like your iron-rich and magnesium-rich foods. So generally, we want you to have a wide range of fruits, vegetables, and foods in general that are unprocessed or minimally processed to help minimize or lower the consumption of salt and therefore the risk of heart disease, strokes, and hypertension.
And as we close our conversation, Abigail, this year's World Health Day theme emphasizes healthier living. Do you have any messages or advice for those who are watching when it comes to salt consumption and their overall well-being?
So, as we move into this healthy well-beings, we encourage or I encourage persons to look at your diet, look at making changes to things that you know will contribute to your high salt intake. So it could be simply as, instead of buying that canned peas, you opt for the dry peas. You know, instead of using the salt fish, you use fresh fish. You look at increasing your fruits and vegetables daily and avoiding caffeine or caffeinated beverages, and of course, exercising and maintaining your healthy weight. As we know, your weight also contributes to elevated blood pressures or your risk for blood pressures, for hypertension, sorry. And with lowering and maintaining a healthy weight, persons with hypertension, they know they are able to have better management, or it contributes to better managing these conditions.
Abigail, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a wonderful day and